Hello everyone, hope all's okay. This session is going to be about the alternative assessment question 3, which is related to the cardiovascular system. It's one of two videos which will take you through the content needed to answer it to an excellent level. So without further ado, we'll start with the functions of the cardiovascular system. There are three functions which we need to be aware of. That's firstly transporting substances around the body, nutrients and waste. Second, controlling body temperature, which we've talked about in temperature homeostasis if you've been in that lesson, and protecting the body, so it contains platelets and white blood cells and things to protect the body. We're really going to be focusing on this first function at the top here, because the criteria of the assignment is explaining how the cardiovascular system interacts with the respiratory system, and really what we're talking about here is how the respiratory system gets oxygen into the body and then the cardiovascular system pumps it around the body. So we're going to be talking about oxygen, which is one of the most important nutrients for the body because we use it to create energy, and without it we would die. So to start with, let's look at the different blood vessels. This is a consistent question in the aspects of human phys exam, where you have to talk about the structure of different blood vessels. So first of all, arteries, they have a thick outer wall because they have lots of layers of muscle around the outside. They have to deal with high pressure, and the layers of the muscle walls are called tunics, tunica, and then a fancy Latin name which escapes me right now. Arteries have a thin lumen, which means the gap in the middle, as opposed to veins, which have a thin outer wall. They don't need to be muscular, and they don't need to squeeze or react to any kind of stimulus. So arteries, when we're under, when we go through exercise, for example, these muscles can squeeze in and make the lumen smaller to increase blood pressure. So these really control our blood pressure, and we can actually take drugs to relax these, like ACE inhibitors or angiotensin II converting enzyme inhibitors, which basically means that our lumen can widen and therefore reduce blood pressure. Particularly useful if you've got a build of plaque in the lumen. Veins have a thin layer of muscle, but there's nothing to really too functional about that. They have a wide lumen because they're under lower pressure. So if you imagine a garden hose, one that's sort of small, one that's big, and you put a certain amount of water through them, which one's going to shoot faster, which one's going to be under higher pressure? Well, this one's going to be under higher pressure because it's got a smaller hole in the middle of the pipe. So arteries generally under high pressure, veins generally under low pressure, which we'll go into later. And then finally capillaries, which are one cell thick, and that's where we get the exchange of substances, because they are only one cell thick. And where you find capillaries, you find exchange, and that's going to be really important later. So when we talk about cardiovascular system, we really need to know firstly about the heart, and there are 5 golden terms that I sort of pitch to students when they're learning about it. The first being that arteries carry blood away from the heart. So if you see a vessel that's going away from the heart, you know instinctively that it's an artery. If you see a blood vessel going towards the heart or into the heart, you know that it is a vein. And you can see that with the in vein. The third key term you need to remember is that pulmonary means lungs. So wherever you see the word pulmonary, you know it means lungs. And the 2 extra terms, oxygenated means blood with oxygen, and you will usually see that as red, and deoxygenated blood means blood without oxygen in, and that would usually be on a diagram for blue. So once you remember all these 5 terms, you can then apply them to the heart, and it doesn't mean, it means that you don't have to look at a heart and memorize it by a picture. you can then work things out depending on whether they go into the heart, from the heart to the lungs, from the lungs, etc. So let's have a look at what's going on. Here we've got the heart in the middle, and we've got a blood vessel that goes to the lungs. So in your own head for a second, is that a vein or an artery? Well, it's going away from the heart, so it's an artery, and it's going to the lungs, so it's the pulmonary artery. I'll just put ART for short. So that's how we can work out what vessel is which, because if it's going to the lungs, if it's going away from the heart, it's an artery, and if it's going to the lungs, it's the pulmonary artery. Now, why would it be going to the lungs? In your own head, well, the answer would be that it's going to the lungs to pick up oxygen. That's where we breathe in. So it picks up oxygen, and then it is returned to the heart. Now this is going into the heart, so it's a vein, and it's coming from the lungs, which means it's the pulmonary vein. Now it's a pulmonary, so that means lungs. It's a vein, it's going into the heart. Now if it's coming from the lungs into the heart, it must have oxygen in it, because that's what it's been to the lungs for. Now that's the way that you can work it out if you see a diagram. Hopefully you can remember that. Now here we have a similar situation, and I just want to add something that I forgot to put on the last slide, in that this vessel here went to the lungs, and there was a vessel that came back into this one, back from the lungs. This was called the pulmonary circuit. Why? Because pulmonary means lungs, and the circuit, it goes to the lungs and back again. That's the pulmonary circuit. So what you're looking at here is the second circuit, and that's called the systemic circuit, which means that it goes to the body and back. Now this vessel here is going away from the heart. So is it an artery or is it a vein? Hopefully you can remember, arteries are away from the heart, so it is an artery. Unfortunately for us, it's called the aorta, which means it starts with an A for aorta, A for artery. Now what I mean by you can work it out is it going to the lungs? No, it has no relationship with the lungs whatsoever. So it's definitely not the pulmonary artery, so it has to be, the only one that's left is the aorta. Goes around to the body cells, that could be the liver, pancreas, could be a muscle, could be your digestive system, and it drops off the oxygen and picks up the carbon dioxide, that is the blood. And then as it's dropped that off and picked up the carbon dioxide, which is a waste product, it then returns into the heart. Now, is that an artery or is it a vein? It's a vein, and they're technically called the vena cava or the vena cava. Now again, fortunately for us, lucky for us, it begins with a V, so V for vein. Again, it has nothing to do with lungs, and therefore it is not the pulmonary vein, we know that, so it has to be the vena cava. So those are the four main vessels that lead to and from the heart. And if you can remember, arteries are away, veins in, pulmonary means lungs, you then have the fundamental understanding to be able to label a diagram with the correct arteries and veins on that are leading to the heart. So this just really summarises what I've just said, but it also involves the capillary and sort of the transfer between, if this was the artery that's coming away from the heart, because it's oxygenated, it's red, this is the systemic circuit, it then goes to an organ, and you can see that the capillaries is where the exchange occurs. So this is where the oxygen's leaving the blood and it's going into the system. But we know that via respiration, cells make carbon dioxide as a byproduct. It's poisonous, we want to get rid of it. So actually that CO2 diffuses back into the blood, goes back to the heart, then back to the lungs to pick up more oxygen and drop it off. And that's essentially the cycle of which oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged in the human body. Summarised by the double pump, and that basically means there's two circuits. There are two sides to the heart which pump independently of each other but in coordination with each other. So there's 4 letters on the screen. Have a think about the names, recap the names of the 4 vessels. And the answers are A, it's going away from the heart and it's going to the body. So it's not the pulmonary artery, that means it must be the aorta. B, this vessel here is going away from the heart, but it's going to the lungs. It's going away, so it must be an artery. It's going to the lungs, so it must be the pulmonary artery. C, it's a vessel that's going into the heart, so it must be a vein, and it's not the pulmonary vein because it's got nothing to do with the lungs, so it must be the vena cava. And finally, D, it's going from the lungs into the heart, so therefore it must be a vein, and it's going from the lungs, so it must be the pulmonary vein. And that's how I would recommend you work it out if you see a diagram. Okay, different slide, working on your understanding from text rather than from a diagram. Have a look at the questions, work out using the logic from the previous slides which vessel it's talking about, and that will help you when you come to write your assignment. Pause the slide, have a think, write them down, and I'll go through the correct answers. Question 1, identify the vessel that brings oxygenated blood back from the lungs. So it must be going into the heart, therefore it is a vein, and it's coming back from the lungs, so it would be the pulmonary vein. Question 2, identify the vessel that brings deoxygenated blood back from the body. So it's coming back from the body into the heart, so that must be a vein. And it's nothing to do with the lungs, so it would be the vena cava or cava. Question 3, identify the vessel that takes deoxygenated blood to the lungs. So it's going from the heart to the lungs, so it's going away from the heart. That must be an artery, and it's going to the lungs, therefore it will be the pulmonary artery. And finally, identify the vessel that takes oxygenated blood to the body. That's from the heart to the body, which is going away from the heart, which would be the aorta. So this is a more structured diagram of the heart, which again you need to go into if you're going to get those distinctions and have an excellent depth or breadth. Now I recommend that you choose a starting point from which you tell the story. It follows the double pump and it will always come back on itself. So you choose a starting point. It's a bit like chicken and egg, the chicken and the egg. But I tend to use this as my starting point, this point here, because I know that this is the blood that's being returned from the body. And it's also this here. So if you can follow this bottom pipe, it comes up behind the heart and actually arrives here. So this i.e. 1 and 2 is the vena cava. It's coming back from the body and it's deoxygenated. So the body's used its oxygen, given it back its carbon dioxide, and it's on its way back to the lungs to give off its carbon dioxide. Now notice how this tube here is coming from below. So this is the lower body. This would be the upper body at the top. And the upper body vena cava would be the superior vena cava, and the blood coming back from the lower body would come back through the inferior vena cava. Once it comes back to the heart, it fills this chamber here, which is called, I'll do it in green, the right atrium. Now, why on earth would it be right? Well, when you're looking at the heart as a diagram, you always put the right hand side is this side, the left hand side is this side, completely opposite to the way that you look at it on the screen, because whoever designed this system in their wisdom was looking at their own heart. So if you were the person on the other side of your computer screen or phone right now, this would be your right side and this would be your left side, and that's the way it is. So just to confuse students who are learning about it, your right is left, left is right, simple. So not surprisingly then, that this side here, this chamber here, is the left atrium. So if we were to draw the heart as a box, we'd have 4 chambers. As such, the top 2 chambers are atrium, and we'd have the right atrium and the left atrium, and the bottom 2 chambers, which I will do in this purpley colour, are down here and here, which are ventricles. So right ventricle, left ventricle. So let me label those. So left ventricle and right ventricle. And down the middle, which I'll draw with this yellow line, is this line here. That's the middle line. That's called the septum. It's the separating line between the left and right side. So if you imagine it going up like that, this is the right hand side, this is the left hand side, or the other way around as you can see it. Okay, so that's the 4 chambers that are involved with the heart. So when the blood returns back to the heart through the vena cava, it fills this right atrium and it gets squeezed. Let me put it in orange again. It gets squeezed down here into the right ventricle. So it goes from 1 to 2 on my diagram. And when this ventricle gets squeezed, it goes up through 3. Now you should be thinking, well, what vessel is that? Well, it's going away from the heart, and it's deoxygenated blood because it's blue, so it's going to the lungs, we know that, so it must be the pulmonary artery. And you can see at this point at the top here, it splits into 2 sections. Why does that split into 2 sections, I hear you ask? Well, there are 2 lungs. The blood needs to go to both right and left lung, so it has to split up. Okay, so this would be the pulmonary artery. Now notice really well, and I'll draw this in A, this white flap here, this V shape, is a valve. And that's basically to stop the backflow of blood. So once the blood has been squeezed from the right atrium down into the right ventricle, then blood can't return back up into the right atrium, and we call that the tricuspid valve. And also you can see that there's a valve here and here. I'll call that B. This again, it's white. That's another valve, and we call that the semilunar valve. It does the same job but in a different place. It stops the backflow of blood back into the right atrium once the blood has been squeezed out into the pulmonary artery. So blood heads off this way and this way to the lungs, picks up its oxygen and then returns here and here. So let's call that number 4. 4 and 4. So it's coming into the heart. This. It's coming into the heart. So it is a artery. Sorry, it's a vein, should I say. It's coming into the heart. It's a vein. Get your facts right. And it's coming back from the lungs, but this time it's got oxygen in it. It's oxygenated. So it's the pulmonary vein. The pulmonary vein, hopefully you can see, fills this chamber here, which, as we've said, if you look in the top right hand corner, is the left atrium. And again, we have a valve that separates here and here. So let's call that 5. This white thing, this white V-shaped thing. It separates the left atrium from the left ventricle, and that is called the bicuspid valve. So the two valves here that separate the atrium and ventricle, one is there on the outer side, is the tricuspid and the bicuspid, often remembered by try before you buy. It's on the left, tri is on the left as you look at it, but it's on the right side of the heart, and the bicuspid valve is on the right as you look, but it's actually on the left hand side of the heart. But they both separate the atria from the ventricles. So when the left ventricle fills up, it then gets pumped through this valve, which fortunately for us again is a semilunar valve. It's exactly the same. So these two valves here are called semilunar valves. This one that we're talking about now, sometimes called the aortic valve. So let me draw number 6 on that. Number 6, that one there, sometimes called the aortic valve, but it's perfectly fine to call it the semilunar valve. And then the blood continues up through this number 7, which hopefully you recognise as the aorta, because it's going away from the heart and it's going to the body. And that's containing oxygenated blood. So that's the flow of blood through the heart. You would be expected to know what vessels are going to and from the heart. You'd need to know the 4 names of the 4 chambers, and you need to know the names of the 4 valves. Run it through again and again to see whether you can remember it. So this is a little summary quiz. There's going to be 10 questions, 10 diagrams. The black arrow is going to be pointing at the heart. You've just got to identify in your own head, or you can write it down, what the correct answer is. I'll put the slide on for a couple of seconds and then I'll tell you the answer. So without further ado, let's go. Question 1. Well, this is the left side, this is the right side. We have 4 chambers, top 2 atria, bottom 2 ventricle. So this is the left ventricle. Question 2. Vessel that's coming into the heart, so it's a vein. It's not been from the lungs, because I know that it's deoxygenated blood because it's blue. So if it's not coming from the lungs, it's coming from the body. Therefore, it is the vena cava or cava, which is the same as this one here as well. But this would be superior, this would be inferior. So logic as before. 4 chambers, this is a chamber, top 2 atria, bottom 2 ventricles. This is the right side, this is the left side, so this one that it's pointing at would be the right atrium. Question 4. Okay, so it's going away from the heart, So it has to be an artery. Question is it going to the body or is it going to the lungs? Well, if you follow it through, this is the deoxygenated blood. It comes down and up. So this is deoxygenated blood. Well, where is it going? It's got no oxygen in it. It has to be going to the lungs. So it is the pulmonary artery. Question 5. Same logic then, going away from the heart. So it's an artery, A for away, and it's got oxygen in it. It's red. So if it's got oxygen in it, it's already been to the lungs. It's picked up its oxygen. Therefore, it can only be the aorta. Question 6. Vessel that's coming into the heart, so it must be a vein. And is it oxygenated or deoxygenated? Well, if we trace this through, it goes up, down, and then up. It comes out oxygenated, so it must be oxygenated. It can't oxygenate itself in the heart. Therefore, this blood must be oxygenated. Therefore, it's coming from the lungs. It's coming from the lungs. It's pulmonary. So it's the pulmonary vein. Question 7. It's to me 4 boxes. Top 2 atria, bottom 2 ventricles, right side, left side. So this is the left atrium. Okay, here's the 4 valves. 1, 2, 3 and 4. The outer 2 have different names, the inner 2 have the same names. So it's try before you buy. So the tricuspid valve. Question 9. This is the valve that is on the aorta, sometimes called the aortic valve, but we can call it, if you wish, the semi-lunar valve. Last but not least, question 10. For drama box, top 2 atria, bottom 2 ventricles. This is the right side, this is the left side, so it is the right ventricle. So I hope that was useful in checking whether you've taken in the information from before. So I wanted to just add this little bit at the end here because when we're talking about veins, veins are the only blood vessel that have veins in it. What should I say, valves in it. So if you imagine this is in a person with blood returning to the heart from the big toe, let's say, then gravity is going to want to put this blood in your big toe. It wants to take it down to the bottom. So as the blood flows up through your veins, gravity takes over and the blood drops down. Well, as it drops down, you can see that the valve shuts. So it's a bit like a one-way system in terms of returning it back to the heart. So I just wanted to put that in to make sure that you're aware that veins have valves. And this is a nice summary of what we said at the start. But you can see arteries send blood from the heart or away from the heart. They're under high pressure. Then their lumen is narrow. They have thick walls. In fact, they have 3 different walls, but they don't have valves. Whereas veins go into the heart. They're under low pressure. They have a wide lumen or a wide hole in the middle. Their walls are thin, and yes, they do have valves. And finally, capillaries, where exchange occurs. They're under low pressure. They have a narrow lumen and a narrow wall thickness, but they don't have valves.